So as a Westerner, you have certain expectations of a dining table. But in Korea, everything is just different. Alright, I gotta admit, we need to move on quickly from this poor imitation of a Korean dining table. But it gets the point across. In Korea, the dining tables are completely different. And we'll get into that in this video. And with what I mean with the dining table is different, I am really talking about the dining experience. While there are some tables that are like meant for sitting on the floor while eating, generally speaking, tables are pretty similar to what we have here in the West. So the dining experience, on the other hand, is completely different. And what I think stands out the most is these things. These are the traditional Korean stainless steel chopsticks and spoon. In contrast to, for example, these things, which are Japanese chopsticks made out of, well, wood. Can't really tell you what kind of wood, but they're made out of wood. So let's start with the material. Why metal? Well, you might think that the stainless steel is a product of modern times. And to some degree, you're right, because stainless steel wasn't around thousands of years ago. However, consistently, Koreans have been making chopsticks out of metals over the centuries. This started a long time ago, and while some people will tell you that chopsticks used to be made for the royal houses, and be made from silver to detect poison, the reality is a little bit more complex. While it's true that people around 1,000 years ago believed that silver could actually detect poison, it wasn't just for that reason that royalty favored silver for their cutlery. After all, silver has some actual benefits for cutlery in general. It's generally antibacterial, it's very hygienic, and it's also kind of expensive. So it's a good status symbol. So yes, the royalties, the royal houses of Korea back in the day, used silver for their cutlery. But it wasn't just to detect poison, it was for many other reasons as well. The first records of sujo, which is a word consisting of sutkadak and chotkadak, which means chopsticks and spoon respectively, actually appeared during the Three Kingdoms period in Korea. The one in Korea, not the one in China. They are completely different. This makes a lot of sense. In this time, bronze metalworking was widely understood in Asia. And so the royalty wanted some bronze cutlery as well. The metal changed over time as well. In the beginning it was bronze, it eventually changed to brass, and eventually silver was something used by royalty as well. But that wasn't introduced until the middle of the Goryeo period. During this time, the sucho also got their modern shape. With the spoon, the swallowtail kind of vanished and became a more slimmer, thinner handle. The chopsticks got straightened out and got flattened out, and the overall length of the chopsticks and spoon were matched to each other. The question still remains, why did Korea gradually transition to metal chopsticks while the rest of Asia stuck with wooden chopsticks? Well, it's true in like the royal houses of other countries in Asia, they also transitioned to specifically silver chopsticks. The question still remains, why did Korea gradually transition to metal chopsticks while the rest of Asia stuck with wooden chopsticks? And actually, also, what's up with the spoon? Where did that come from? So it's true, like nobility were actually the trendsetters here. They started using metal chopsticks out of reasons for status or prestige. Some used the silver for the poison detection, but mostly it was to show off, to show that they were like leading everyone else. However, in Korea, there's something different going on as well. Nobility in Korea back in the day was a lot closer to the common people than in other parts of Asia. This simply meant that the eating cultures, tradition, and etiquettes were passed down a lot easier than in other parts of Asia, including the metal cutlery. Part of it is also that back in the day, bronze and brass specifically was a lot easier to obtain, which meant that not necessarily all the common people, but maybe the richer part of the common people was able to afford some metal cutlery and, be somewhat closer to the elites. The petty elites, maybe. Now for the spoon. The spoon and chopsticks were actually the norm all over Asia, let's say 1,000 years ago. But most countries dropped the spoon mostly because of dietary reasons. However, in Korea, it made a lot of sense to keep the combination of chopsticks and spoons. In Korea, it was very custom to have some, let's say, wet, soupy foods next to some, more hard foods. So I just need a little bit of help with the translation of this last part of this article from the, what's it called? Encyclopedia of Korean Culture. It's talking about the chopsticks and spoon and also, well, specifically the customs that come with it. So essentially, there is the custom that babies will get a chopstick and spoon combination at their first birthday. Throughout the years, they will get bigger and maybe better chopstick and spoon. And when they marry, there are a set of chopstick and spoon, but also a set of a boil for the rice and a boil for soup that are being acquired or being made or being bought by the bride for both the bride and the groom. There's also a separate set being acquired for guests. Essentially, they're supposed to use these chopsticks and spoon combination pretty much for the rest of their lives, at least according to customs. This perfectly leads us to the next major difference in Western and Korean dining experience, where in the West we're very used to have just a plate per person with some cutlery, and you get food on the plate and you just eat it like that. In Korea, it's a lot more different. There's usually, and again, this also depends on the dish, there is at least 2 bowls per person, one for the rice, one for the soup. There's the cutlery. There's also sometimes another plate to bring the main dish onto before you eat it, next to the rice and the soup. And essentially, the rest of the table consists of smaller plates with some side dishes, also known as banchan. And then there's the main dish, what they traditionally call I would just call the big pot, for just the lack of a better term. Essentially, traditionally, Koreans eat on a table with somewhat of a big pot in the middle with their food in it, and then next to that there's side dishes, and then there's your own plate to eat from. While there are a lot of records and stories about how Koreans eat, and specifically dishes with soup and non-soup combined. For example, the stories about how Koreans like to eat from one big pot of soup with the whole family. I would personally want to invite you to one of my experiences at the dinner table with my wife and my father and mother-in-law, and see what we have in front of us. The picture is taken from the couch. The couch was reserved for, amongst others, me, because I wasn't flexible enough to sit on the ground for long periods of time. So it's the couch of shame anyway. Other than that, we can see here a bigger bowl of soup. And traditionally, especially among a closer group, for example, among your family or among close friends, it's quite common to share a bigger bowl of soup. This is usually a little bit frowned upon in Western culture, where you get your own little bowl of soup and you eat it from there. And while that's true in a lot of restaurants in Korea as well, um, there's also like the other side that sometimes people just prefer one big bowl of soup where everyone can put their spoon in and eat from. While at first this may raise a lot of concerns about hygiene, you have to understand in Korea hygiene is taken quite seriously. And people are quite aware of their own hygiene. Like, for starters, the table and everything is pretty drastically cleaned from before, during, and after the eating. But also on a more personal level, especially if you're eating a lot with close friends or family, a lack of your personal hygiene also becomes a detriment to the people around you. So people who aren't feeling well or feel like they might endanger others by eating with this kind of food sharing practices would just not participate. If you don't feel well, then maybe it's better to get like a little bit of a separate bowl if you really want to eat some soup, or just not eat soup for today at all. And from here, I'd like to invite you to a lot of other Korean eating experiences that I've had over the years. Of course, not all of them have been in Korea, because like we also made some of the Korean food here in the Netherlands. However, most of these have a very common theme to it. Of course, there's the cutlery that's a little bit different, but in general, there is a main dish, a lot of side dishes, your personal dishes, and then, of course, you can share all you want. This doesn't only stop with food, this also goes for drinks. And I found it quite nice. Most restaurants just have water as a base, and you can get water for free. But on top of that, you can also order something to drink, whether it's beer or something non-alcoholic like a soda. It's very common for me and my wife, but also for other situations, to order one or two drinks and then just share them among the group. Kind of not have to drink a whole soda can by yourself. If you look closely, you can also detect another commonality between at least some of the dishes, and that's the added greenery. In Korea, we call it sam. Well, as a Westerner, you might not think much of it. Koreans use sam pretty much all over the place. Not in every dish, but in a lot of dishes, sam is used as a way of eating as well. It's not just celery or cabbage leaves, but it can consist of quite many leaves, including, well, there's the cabbage, there's the celery, but also peanut leaves, pumpkin leaves, but also various forms of seaweed, including the traditional fried seaweed, which in Korea is known as kim. The way you use it in Korea is that you take the leaf in your hand, you select a bunch of side dishes, put it in the leaf, you put some rice in it as well, and then you include some samjang, which is a little bit mildly spicy sauce. And then you wrap it up like a package and pretty much stuff it in your mouth. Even as tradition, you're supposed to stuff as much of it as in your mouth as possible, so that even if that means that your mouth is a little bit overfull. It also introduces another very interesting aspect of the Korean sharing culture, because not only can you make some for yourself, you can also make it for others. Which was quite a surprise to me when the first time someone actually handed me a little package of what they made of, well, some. Some actually has a lot deeper roots in Korean culture than I expected. It dates back all the way to the Goryeo period. During this time, the majority of Korea was Buddhist and believed that killing and eating animals wasn't the right thing to do, so they were mostly vegetarian. So a lot of the dishes that were popping up at the time were made from like vegetables and leaves and a lot of side dishes. including rice. Even back then, some was already an inherent part of Korean culture. It got a couple of mentions in some books, amongst others, a very important book, the Dongguk Se Shigi. I'm not too familiar with the book, but for Koreans, it's one of the ancient books of Korean customs. They talk about how Korean servants are taken by the Yuan dynasty of China. Use some to kind of remember how it feels like to be at home. For people who are, for servants who are homesick, they just made some and then they feel a little bit better. But as the eras pass by, in the Joseon area is actually the first recorded case where some is used in combination with, in this case, fish. And as we saw with the chopstick and spoon, during the Joseon period, the sam actually got its current shape. It was actually used with some rice, with some other side dishes, but crucially with sardines and some samjang. The same samjang as we kind of use today. Since then, sam really hasn't changed a whole lot. I say it hasn't changed a whole lot, however, the core concept hasn't changed, but the application got a lot more widespread. Well, it didn't limit itself to lettuce, or what I've also seen a lot is the nettle leaves. It also got widespread with kim specifically, which is also used a lot for eating in a similar way. I always call it the packaging style of eating food. And while it's not specifically mentioned anywhere, I also suspect that this is one of the origin stories of kimbap. Of course, kimbap probably has many origin stories, but this at least leads directly into the path of kimbap, where some seaweed is used with some rice in it and with also some vegetables, and then packaged and then served. In the end, it took me quite a bit of time and quite a lot of food to fully understand the Korean eating experience. And right now, I'm even trying to applying that kind of method to Western cuisine, although with mixed results, obviously. So before we wrap this up, if you have ever eaten like this, if you've been to Korea or eaten in a Korean restaurant, what stood out most to you? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.